Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Tyler, and today we're going to be recapping the Orioles' unfortunate series loss to the Oakland Athletics this past weekend at Camden Yards. Not going to spend a whole lot of time on that because I think the analysis for it kind of boils down to one player really having a bad weekend. Of course, baseball's not that simple, but two blown saves in a three-game series, should have swept it, ended up losing it. I don't want to pin too much on one player, but it is what it is. Then let's talk about some good injury news for the Orioles. They're going to be getting Kyle Bradish and John Means back this week, likely. We'll talk about that and then how that impacts the Orioles pitching situation overall, because I think it's got some far-reaching impacts, beyond just the rotation, as well as the bullpen, of course. Give some awards out and then preview a really important four-game series against the New York Yankees coming up this week at Camden Yards. In fact, I'm recording this on Monday morning, and that series starts tonight, Monday night, at Camden Yards. So we'll spend a little bit of time on that. So, all right, let's start with the game recaps. I don't want to belabor these too much because, as I said, it really came down to one player having a really tough weekend for the Orioles. And that sometimes can be a blip, can sometimes be, indicating a larger problem. But we'll talk about game one first. So first, Corbin Burnes pitches for the Orioles here. This is the game that I think is particularly frustrating from the Orioles' perspective because you had your ace on the mound, Corbin Burnes, against Ross Stripling, who came into this game for the A's, I think with an ERA above 5, if I'm not mistaken. And although his peripherals had indicated he'd pitched a little bit better than that, I think, when you enter a game as, a league leader in the Orioles with your ace, who's potentially a Cy Young candidate on the mound, against the A's, who, to their credit, are better, I think, this year than many anticipated. Now their offense is pretty terrible, which, makes game three a little bit more frustrating, but their pitching in general has not been bad this year. But, those facts aside, I think you come into this game expecting, okay, Orioles, even if you don't get a sweep, whatever, you're going to win game one, Burnes on the mound against kind of a dud in Ross Stripling. And that's not really what happened. Now, that's not because Burnes didn't pitch well. He really did. The only run he allowed was, again, a home run in the first inning, which has become something of an issue for him. If you're going to allow home runs, let them be solo home runs. But it's kind of been a thing, I think, in 3 of his 5 starts, or maybe 4 of his 5 starts, where he allows a run in the first inning, and then that run being via a home run. In this instance, it was Shea Langoliers who homered in the first inning and put the A's up 1-0 early on. But then the Orioles did kind of fight back later on in the game. Ryan O'Hearn singled in Gunnar Henderson in the third. Cedric Mullins hit a solo home run in the fourth. And then that had the Orioles up 2-1, which was a little bit disappointing to only be up a run in that situation. Again, Stripling not very good, only struck out 3, but the Orioles didn't force any walks, didn't earn any walks in this game, which was kind of the differentiator there because they did get enough hits. 6 hits, they should have done better there. But only scored 2 runs against Stripling in 5 2/3. Burnes does well to allow just the 1 run in 6 innings, 6 strikeouts, 3 walks, 1 earned run being that home run. And the bullpen did pretty well for the Orioles here, in general. Danny Coulomb was good. Yanier Cano, I think, looked really good in his inning in a third, struck out 2. And then Craig Kimbrel comes in, and I think it was just his worst outing I think I've seen in an Orioles uniform thus far. Through 24 total pitches, only 8 of them were for strikes. He was throwing the ball all over the place. He just had no control at all. He had the mound visit, and then right after the mound visit, threw a wild pitch, which ended up helping the Orioles out because Rutschman was able to track the ball down, throw it back to home, and Kimbrel, well, they originally ruled the runner safe at home plate, but on review, they did rule him out. So the Orioles were able to escape from that inning without being down, but they were tied now 2-2. Prior to that, I should have mentioned Abraham Toro doubled into right field, which is where Ryan McKenna was playing. He had just recently been promoted, somewhat surprisingly. The Orioles had demoted Jackson Holliday, and McKenna came up, had to be added back to the 40-man roster. So McKenna's out there in right field. The ball's hit hard right at him. McKenna probably should have done better, but it is a tough play. It's right at the outfielder, slightly over his head, which is one of those ones where you can't really make a break one way or another right when the ball's off the bat. You kind of have to wait a beat. And McKenna did. and then just couldn't catch up to the ball over his head. So, you can argue McKenna should have caught the ball, and maybe the Orioles escape from that game without, they get the win, even with Kimbrel not looking very good. But at the end of the day, it was like 106-mile-per-hour liner off the bat from Toro. I'm going to put the blame on Kimbrel in that one as well. He ends up throwing just a third of an inning, allows 2 hits, 1 run, 3 walks, and only his line was only that good because Keegan Aiken came in and did a really nice job to to get out of that inning without any further damage. He struck out a batter and then got a pop out. Then into the 10th inning, the Orioles again had a chance to sort of win this game again because the A's made sort of a boneheaded play where they had the ghost runner on second base. Then they got the ghost runner over to third base. And then on a grounder to Ramon Urias, he throws home and gets that runner in a rundown between third and home plate. They eventually tag that runner out, and then the runner over at first base was unable to get into scoring position, which I think in that instance you think, okay, the Orioles are gonna squeeze out of this with relative ease. They had a gift there, but instead Brett Rooker hits a double. Colton Cowser misses the cutoff man on the ball into home, or on the throw home. Langolier scores all the way from first base anyway, so it didn't even matter that he didn't get into scoring position. And the Orioles go down 3-2. A's turn to Mason Miller, who was fantastic in the bottom of the 10th inning. They had held him back for the 9th, brought him in for the 10th, which was really smart managing from Mark Kotsay because he's a strikeout guy. He's basically striking out two batters an inning. So why waste him in the 9th when there's no runners on? Let another inferior reliever take that inning, and we'll have Miller take the third, where he's more or take the 10th, where he's more likely to strike out batters and not allow anybody to score because they're not even going to put the ball in play. So pretty smart there. I think you could have maybe argued the Orioles should have played small ball against Miller, try to bunt the ball, do whatever you can to kind of waste him from the A's perspective and just sort of survive the 10th inning and get to the 11th. They didn't do that. They swung for the fences like normal, which, I'm not going to totally argue with. Gunnar Henderson was coming up with a runner in scoring position. I think you kind of assume he's going to put the ball in play, but, swung for the fences, struck out on 3 pitches, and that was the game there. The A's win the opener 3-2. So, yeah, I mean, it comes down to 2 things for me. One, the offense was pretty bad in this game. They went 1 for 7 with runners in scoring position, left 6 on base, struck out 7 times, only worked 1 walk. Not a good day for the offense. So there's that part of it. And then it's that Kimbrel was horrific in the 9th inning. Just like I said, the absolute worst I've seen from him. If we go to like his breakdown here, it wasn't a velocity issue. His average on the fastball was 94 miles per hour, which is what he's averaged all year. He actually got 4 whiffs on 7 swings from the fastball. So again, there was movement on there. It wasn't that the A's were putting the ball in play hard a ton. They did that. Toro double was hit really hard, but the issue was more that he just got himself into trouble. He walked 3 guys and then, of course, gave up the hard hit, had the wild pitch, which ended up not really hurting them, but was, bad to see anyway. So just a really bad game from Craig Kimbrel there in general. Keegan Aiken, again, really good from Keegan Aiken. He's had a nice start to the season. And then from there, it kind of becomes, again, you have used Cano, you have used Kimbrel, he was terrible. You used Aiken, Coulombe's already pitched. Those are your best bullpen guys. Then, you're putting Jacob Webb in there in a tough situation in the 10th inning, and, he's unable to get the job done. But there's really not much else to say about game 1 in general. Just sort of a bummer of a game that you would have hoped you won, but you didn't. And now you got to come back in game 2 and take care of business, which is exactly what the Orioles did. They end up beating the A's 7-0. It was just sort of a bloodbath the whole time. JP Sears early on was doing a nice job against the Orioles, but then the floodgates kind of open against him in the 4th and the 5th, and then Gunnar Henderson hits a 2-run bomb in the 7th. A nice bounce back day for the Orioles lineup. Everybody was contributing pretty much, so a lot to like there. Then meanwhile on the mound, Cole Irvin, I think, arguably put together his best start as an Oriole. His 7 innings was the longest in an Orioles uniform, struck out 5, 4 hits. I think it's very classic Cole Irvin stuff. He had a lot of balls in play, only had 7 whiffs on 46 swings. So again, this isn't like wipeout stuff from Cole Irvin, But what he does do is he doesn't walk people. He strikes out just enough guys to stay out of trouble. The contact he does give up in this one wasn't super hard. It was unlike that start a few weeks ago, I think against the Royals, where he was giving up a lot of hard contact. In this one, a lot of weak contact. So, it has to feel good for Cole Irvin to pitch against his former team, even pitch against the guy who he was traded for, Daryl Hernandez, former Orioles farmhand, who is, probably going to be a pretty good player, but had a tough start to his big league career here. Went 1 for 3. As you can see here, he's got an OPS of only 400 on the early season. But Cole Irvin, good stuff for him. And I think it's a pretty important context for him as well, given some of the stuff we're going to talk about here in a minute with pitching injuries, having, arguably your best start for your team when some other guys who are kind of vying for the same spot as you are about to come back to the roster here directly. Good, good for him to step up and really perform in good in a tough situation for him against your former team. You're getting internal pressure to perform. Good stuff from Cole Irvin. And then just the offense in general, really good. 9 hits, 1 walk, but 7 runs, a lot of power. Rutschman getting a home run is huge. That's kind of been the knock on him early on, is that he's a singles machine, and he's not walking as much as last year, but he's getting on base because he's getting so many singles. But we've lacked the power from Rutschman. But he gets off the schneid here, hits a home run, his third of the season. Mountcastle goes deep. Gunnar Henderson goes deep. So again, this team that's had a really good time hitting home runs continues to do it here against a good pitcher in JP Sears. Like, I've been a JP Sears fan. He obviously has good stuff. He was getting a lot of strikeouts in this game, 8 strikeouts and 6 1/3. The line for him is a little bit unfair. 3 home runs is tough. You're not deserving of 3 home runs necessarily, but it is what it is. And his ERA goes up because of it. But, JP Sears is a good, competent big league pitcher. Like I've said already on here, the A's pitching has not really been their problem. It's been their offense, which scores, I think, 2.5 runs to three runs a game. Been a pretty putrid offense. The pitching, though, has been quite good. And, so good for the Orioles to do a nice job against a good pitcher there. And that's about all there is to say about game 2. And then moving on to game 3, this one, another heartbreaker for the Orioles. They lose 7-6, and the game needed all 9 innings because, again, Craig Kimbrel did not pitch well. He comes in the 9th inning to get a save and instead blows his second save of the weekend, his third of the year. He walks a guy and then gives up a 2-run homer to go from the Orioles up by 1 to the Orioles down by 1. He also has to leave the game early, doesn't record an out because he's suffering from some back tightness. I think Brandon Hyde said after the game that he just didn't look right out there. He looked okay early in the outing, then looked like he was uncomfortable, and the Orioles made the decision to take him out of the game. And as of this recording, we don't really know what the prognosis is there. Obviously, this is a guy that's almost 36 years old. There's going to be nicks. The Orioles have tried to kind of stay away from him when they can, but they've been in a lot of close ball games recently. And I think, you know, given the state of the bullpen being that it's a very deep group, but not necessarily any one player is stepping up. I don't know that Brandon Hyde feels great about giving anybody save opportunities that's not Craig Kimbrel right now, although after this weekend, maybe you go to Cano for this type of stuff. If Kimbrel does avoid an IL stint, we'll see. But he was bad again. His ERA is up to 3.18 for the year. Besides that, on the pitching side, this was another start for Albert Suarez. Definitely his worst one so far. Obviously, been great in his first 2. Only goes 4 innings, allows 4 runs on 7 hits, a walk, 6 strikeouts. But what I will say about him is that his fastball was quite good again. 11 whiffs on 26 swings, averaged 95.4 miles per hour, maxed out at 97.6. That guy, while this outing was not as good as we've seen from him, that fastball is a legitimate weapon. And again, talking about these pitchers getting healthy, they've got to go somewhere as far as a guy you're going to give up on after 2 really good starts and then a third that the top line numbers aren't great, but there's certain characteristics that I think you'd like to keep around on your roster. We'll talk about that in just a second. Otherwise, the other issue is Danny Coulomb gave up a run, just a solo home run in 2/3 of an inning. Besides that, the bullpen was quite good again. Keegan Aiken, 2 innings, 2 strikeouts. It was good to see him go multiple innings. That's something the Orioles haven't really done with him this year. He had been sort of a long man starter, obviously coming up through the minors. They tried him as a starter early on in his career, didn't go great. He's been much better in these short outings, but he shows here he can go multiple innings when needed. So that was nice to see. Again, his 3.46 ERA, I think, is blown up by one really bad outing he had a couple weeks ago. But other than that, he's been really good this year and a weapon for the Orioles from the left side. Again, a good outing from him. Rutschman goes deep again. Mountcastle goes deep again. Ramon Urias hits his first home run of the year. Really good to see that from him because, now that Jackson Holliday's back down, I think for at least a little bit, I would expect Holliday to be back, you know, maybe early June is kind of what I'm thinking. I don't think it's going to be forever, but they probably want him to go back down, get some confidence, all that stuff. But Rutschman with another home run. Again, we're seeing the power kind of come back for him. That's huge. Cowser hits a double. The offense was good again. They struck out 12 times, which that's sort of the deal with this team, I think, is going to be you're going to get the long ball from them. You're going to get strikeouts from them. It's sort of kind of not regressing necessarily, but I would say an evolution of this offense from being, I think, overly patient last year. I think Brandon Hydes even said that certain members of the offense have been overly patient now to the point where they should be, more mature, seeing the ball better, and you're more able to be a little free swinging and sort of take your lumps a little bit that come with the long ball, because you do see Rutschman here struck out 3 times in addition to that home run. So again, a lot of strikeouts for the team right now, a lot of home runs for him. You're scoring 6 runs, you're feeling pretty good. It just wasn't a great day for the pitching staff, particularly Albert Suarez had a tough day, and then Craig Kimbrel kind of fell apart there in the ninth inning again, and then of course leaves with the injury. As for awards, I feel like it's pretty straightforward this weekend. I'm going to give the MVP of the weekend to Cole Irvin. Now, I know the A's offense is not spectacular, so going 7 shutout against them isn't necessarily as impressive as going 7 shutout against the Braves, but they're a major league team. They have some, no doubt major league hitters in the lineup, and you have to provide the context of Irvin playing his former team. That's huge, and the context of some internal competition, breathing down his neck. So Irvin gets it for me. He's a guy that I think is just like so helpful to a major league staff. He can give you innings. He can be competent. He can, not walk anybody when he's at his best. Cole Irvin gets the MVP for me. I think I also considered Ryan Mountcastle and Adley Rutschman given their 2 home runs on the weekend, but it just feels to me on a weekend where the pitching staff struggled so much in certain aspects. Irvin gets it because he kind of broke through that and did a really nice job. And then for least valuable player, that feels fairly simple as well. Not to be piling on, but Craig Kimbrel was just so poor this weekend. He potentially is injured as well. You have to give it to Craig Kimbrel. 2 blown saves, really looked horrible in both outings. And now if he's injured, the Orioles are in a little bit of a pickle there, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But Craig Kimbrel, certainly going to be my least valuable player of the Orioles for this weekend. Now let's get to some good news, because there was some of that, and the first one there is that Kyle Bradish is ready to go. The Orioles have determined that he's not going to make any more rehab starts. In his last rehab start, he threw 77 pitches over 5 innings for Norfolk, and he is deemed ready to go. It's certainly a little bit sooner than I was expecting for Bradish to be good to go. You hear about a UCL, which is typically going to be, Tommy John considerations are bandied about. Turns out he doesn't need it. He just needs to rehab and rest, and he's going to be, trying to make it happen. But he was said to be, behind John Means in terms of recovery. We know Means didn't start you know, his normal throwing really until late March, get into rehab games. And now we are talking about him potentially coming back this week. Well, Bradish has been deemed ready even sooner than that, when he started his throwing later than Means did. So, I think it doesn't really say anything about Means necessarily. He's kind of been on the same trajectory the whole time, and we'll talk about him momentarily. He's sort of stayed true to that, and he should be ready to go here shortly, which is what we've kind of anticipated the whole time. But Bradish, man, he's just another kind of dude. He was ready to get back to the rotation, and he went to work, and I think he missed there was a start that got kind of scratched for him because of some poor weather in, I want to say Aberdeen, but it might have been Bowie, I can't remember. And apparently he ended up doing just a simulated game or through batting practice a day instead to kind of make up for it. Like, this is a guy that was anxious to get back on the mound. And here is a quote from Brandon Hyde on Bradish. She said, our medical team talked to him last night, the pitching guys as well. He feels great. We're just looking right now when to slot him in, but he's going to be with us soon. He got to an inning spot and a pitch spot, the amount of pitches he threw where we feel like he's ready. Kyle was one of the best pitchers in the league last year, and we're excited to have him back. And I think that kind of says it all. And it's true. He was one of the best pitchers in baseball last year, up there for Cy Young Award in the AL. And you bring him back, you pair him with this version of Corbin Burnes, who has been fantastic. I think everything is advertised for Burnes. He's had the first inning struggles, but that happens. And at the end of the day, he still pitched really well. Add him and Bradish, two guys that I think you consider, Cy Young candidates as recently as last year for both of them. Add in Grayson Rodriguez, who's been, I think, fantastic apart from one bad start. And that's a really strong top three that, if the playoffs start tomorrow and the Orioles need to go, win a 5-game series, that's your three dudes. Pair that with the Orioles offense, which has been, hitting balls out of the park left and right. And yeah, they'll go cold occasionally, but in general is a really dynamic, you know, tough offense for a pitcher to get through more than one or two times. You're feeling pretty good about the Orioles' chances there. So huge news for the Orioles there. Then you move on to John Means. As we talked, I think the last time I did an episode, he had been struggling and was also nearing the end of his 30-day rehab stint. Well, he has done his rehab now. And if we look at his game logs, his most recent game against Gwinnett was fantastic. And this is the same team that he had struggled against a little bit on April 23rd. He allowed 3 runs on 7 hits over 4 1/3. He comes back on the 28th, throws 7 innings, allows 1 hit, no runs, 1 walk, 8 strikeouts, looks really, really good. And he had started his rehab on the 31st of March, took basically the entire 30 days, pitched on the 28th, and now he's going to be ready to come back as well. And then CNL Perez, this is a little bit different from Means and Bradish in that Perez isn't necessarily ready to come back just yet from sort of that hip oblique injury he suffered early in the season. But he's already made 2 rehab appearances on the 24th and the 27th of April. Again, he's a pitcher, so he can take 30 days, and the Orioles may end up taking those 30 days or a good chunk of them in order to get things right on their roster. But he pitched against Gwinnett as well. Went an inning in the third, allowed 1 hit, 1 walk, 1 strikeout. He's a reliever, so the barometer's a little bit different. I think you just want to make sure he's recovering, quickly, and the velocity looks good, but he should be on the way back here soon. And then the final injury update was something I don't have a screen share of here on the YouTube part of this, but Tyler Wells still not even throwing yet. He's just resting. So I think we've got at least a few weeks there, maybe more, because again, he'll start his rehab and he can take 30 days. So we'll see about Tyler Wells. No news is good news there. I think there's nothing significantly wrong. They're just resting him. He'd been struggling. And I think we know with Wells, he's the guy that tends to kind of flame out as the season goes on. So it could sort of just be built into him for this year from the Orioles perspective is, let's slow play stuff. Let's sit you down when you need to sit down. Let's get you rested so we've got you there in September when we need you versus taking off, a month and a half in the middle of the season. We don't want to do that. So that's the updates on the injuries. So what's interesting is Bradish and Means are expected back this week. We'll talk about the Yankee series in a second. The 4th game of that series right now is set as to be determined who will pitch. That likely is going to be Kyle Bradish. Because Means would be on short rest, I think, or maybe Means would be on normal rest. Let me see here. He pitched on the 28th, so the 29th, 30th, 1st, 2nd. Means I think would be on a day short of rest, whereas Bradish would be on normal rest. So it's probably going to be Kyle Bradish, but Means will probably be back right after that. So that's 2 guys coming back to the Orioles 26-man roster this week. So that gets us into sort of some interesting roster crunch discussion, which is always sort of fun, meat and potatoes of baseball fandom. But the Orioles have 26 men on the roster. You're limited to 13 pitchers, so you can't do any of the funny business with pitching that you can with hitting, where you can say, all right, we can go a man down in the bullpen this week because we have 2 off days or whatever. So let's go with 14 hitters and 12 pitchers. You can't do the reverse with pitchers where you can say, let's have 14 pitchers and 12 hitters. You have to have a max of of 13 pitchers. You can't go beyond that, which is what the Orioles are at right now. They have 13 pitchers in tow at the moment. So when you look at the Orioles pitching situation, I think there's a pretty obvious low man in the pecking order, and that's going to be Yohan Ramirez here. He's a guy who the Orioles claimed off waivers from the Mets in April, or earlier this month, rather. He doesn't have any options remaining. He's 29 years old. He has not pitched particularly well for the Orioles. And he's the type of guy that I think if you DFA him, you don't feel like you're losing a whole lot. And there's also the chance that you get him back. You can keep him in the organization because nobody else claims him. Because I believe the way the waiver wire works, he was, DFA'd from an NL team. So everyone in the NL had to turn him away. And then it goes over to the AL, and the Orioles have been a team closer to the top of the AL all year. So while I don't know where they were in the pecking order when that waiver claim went in, they were probably fairly high up there. So we had to go all the way through the NL, most of the way through the AL. And then that's when the Orioles had a chance at him. So I think Yohan Ramirez is the obvious guy to go first. Then you have to figure out if there are any IL situations going on. Kimbrel maybe is going to need an IL stint. He didn't look super comfortable coming off the field. His velocity wasn't down, so that kind of makes me think, I don't know, maybe I don't know. He might have just been upset. It could have been some body language stuff. I'm not sure. I'm sure they're not lying about there being back tightness. He's a guy that's almost 36 years old. I'm not 36 years old even, and I have back tightness. So I'm sure a guy a couple years older who's a professional athlete experiences that to a far larger degree. So there might be an IL situation there, and in that situation, if you DFA Ramirez and Kimbrel needs an IL stint, there's your two spots right there of Means and Bradish coming back. What I would then assume is that Cole Irvin and Albert Suarez would shift into bullpen roles for the Baltimore Orioles. Now, Irvin is a guy we've seen pitch in the bullpen for the Orioles recently. He would give them a long man in the pen, which they don't really have right now. As I said earlier, Aiken gave them 2 innings this weekend in one game. That's not something he has recently been doing for them, and I wouldn't even consider 2 innings to be a long man. That's more of a 3+ inning situation. But Irvin would give them that, which they haven't had in a long time. So that would be beneficial. Suarez is a guy that has not been pitching out of the bullpen for the Orioles organization this year, but he's a guy that has an elite pitch in that fastball that's getting a 40% whiff rate, is averaging 95 miles per hour. I think that's a guy that you probably don't want to risk losing if you DFA him, which you would have to do if you want to send him to the minors. He can't be optioned. He has to be sent through waivers, and I just don't know that the Orioles want to risk that right now. At the same time, I don't think that you want to say, oh, Suarez was so good in his first 2 outings and then not as good in his third. We should still give him the benefit of the doubt and let him keep pitching in the rotation and instead put Means in the bullpen. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. You got to go with track record there. Means historically has been a very competent, good, even rotation pitcher in the major leagues for the Orioles specifically. You put Means back in the rotation for now, and I think you hold on to Suarez by putting him in the bullpen. And that feels, in general, obviously that is an upgrade. You would lose Kimbrel to the IL in that instance, and then you've got to figure out a closer situation. For me, you're probably doing Cano first there, just because that's what they've done recently. But you could also do closer by committee, which I don't know if I've said it on this podcast, but that's always my preferred method. Is you see who's coming up in the batting order for the opposition, and you match up with them. If it's a bunch of lefties, maybe you give Danny Coulomb or Keegan Aiken a save opportunity. If it's a righty, you let Yenier Cano. Maybe Dylan Tate, although I haven't loved how he's pitched, although his ERA is good. A lot of the peripherals aren't as good. But that's sort of the read on the situation right now for this week is Kimbrel IL, Ramirez DFA. Then you have room for Means and Bradish, and that pushes Irvin and Suarez to the bullpen. Now, what gets more complicated is when Cionel Perez is deemed ready. The Orioles don't exactly need a lefty in the bullpen right now, even less so if Irvin goes out there. Irvin would be more of a long man, so handedness doesn't matter as much. But in addition to him, you have Aiken throwing really well, Coulomb throwing really well. Perez is sort of duplicative of their abilities there. Perez has been quite good for the Orioles these last 2 seasons. He's a guy that definitely runs hot and cold, but I think they'd rather have that insurance policy. And when Perez does come back, that makes things even a little harder because the only guys on the pitching staff with options, you've got Rodriguez and Kramer in the rotation. You're not going to option them. They've both been very good. And in the bullpen, you got Yenier Cano. You're not going to option him. Keegan Aiken. I think coming into the season, Aiken seemed like a guy that's probably going to get optioned at some point, but I'm not sure you can do that right now unless he starts having, a really bad week and you determine he needs some work, but he's pitching too well to option him. Dylan Tate's the interesting one. His numbers are good at the top. He's got good ground ball rate, which is important for him. He's getting a good ERA. I think it's like 2.5 right now, but he's getting like no whiffs. Some of the peripherals for him don't look great. So maybe he's a guy you could option if you want to keep everybody in the organization. But if that's not really important to you, then I think the odd man out is probably Mike Baumann. He's a guy that they've tried to make work for several years now. He's not pitching well at the moment. He's just not becoming the guy that I think they were hoping he would be. He's also about to be 29. Like he's not a spring chicken anymore. He's not a 24, 25-year-old that you think still has some room to grow. That's not to say he couldn't go somewhere else and really blossom. But I think for the Orioles where they are now, if you're trying to put the absolute best bullpen together, and Perez is healthy, I'm not sure that Mike Baumann is part of that. And he's a guy that I think if you DFA, somebody else will claim him because while he hasn't been good this year, he was quite good last year. And sort of added to that is he was quite good last year, and the Orioles still determined that they would prefer to have Jacob Webb in the bullpen for the ALDS than Mike Baumann. And I think that kind of speaks volumes to what they think of the two compared to each other. They like Baumann, but they don't necessarily like him more than Webb. So sort of an interesting thing there that if the rubber meets the road, it could be the end of Mike Baumann here when Perez is deemed healthy and if nobody else has an injury pop up between now and then, which is a big if in Major League Baseball teams. So that's sort of the situation for the pitching staff at the moment. Then up next for the Orioles are 4 games against the New York Yankees. Game 1 is going to be Clark Schmidt against Grayson Rodriguez. 6:35 start time there on Masson. Tuesday, Game 2, Nestor Cortez against Dean Kramer. Another 6:35 start on Masson as well. Game 3 is Wednesday. Corbin Burns against Gill. I don't even know Gill's first name for the Yankees. Luis Gill. That's a 6:35 start as well. I think you'd hope the Orioles win that game, but I've said that before. I will try to not say it again. That game will be on MLB Network as well as Masson for anybody that's outside of the Masson viewing area or locality or whatever if you get blacked out on MLB TV. And then on Thursday, Carlos Rodon against To Be Determined, which we're assuming right now is going to be Kyle Bradish. Could potentially be John Means. It might just depend on how each one of them is recovering from their most recent start, but I would guess it's going to be Kyle Bradish there. And that should be a good game, a 1:05 p.m. Getaway day for both teams, I think. Rodon has pitched much better for the Yankees this year, has become kind of their ace with Garrett Cole on the shelf. And a really crucial game for the two teams here. The Yankees come into it with a full game lead on the Orioles after the Yankees won on Sunday and the Orioles lost. They were previously percentage points apart with the Orioles leading because they'd played fewer games, but the Yankees winning the game, the Orioles losing has the Yankees up a full game on the O's there. So really crucial, as important as a, late April, early May game can be. While these games matter just as much as the September ones, it does feel like they have a multiplying factor here, and you'd love to see the Orioles win this series. I think if you split, you feel okay. If you win 3 out of 4, you're feeling ecstatic. 4 out of 4 is icing on top, and obviously losing the series at home is going to feel like a gut punch a little bit, and it's going to put the Orioles behind the 8 ball a little bit. Of course, you lose 3 out of 4, you're only losing a game in the standings. It's not, a decimator, but it's going to hurt. It's going to feel, mentally maybe like a bit of a punch. So hopefully the Orioles win the games. I feel good about the Orioles offense right now, and I don't think the Yankees pitching is particularly good. I know Rodon has pitched quite well, but the rest of the rotation is a little bit more pedestrian. The bullpen hasn't been particularly good for the Yankees. So again, I feel good about that aspect of it as well. it'll just be if the Orioles can make these Yankees pitchers work a little bit. I don't know that teams care as much anymore about pitch count. Obviously, you're not going to have a guy throw 150 pitches, but if the Orioles can face these guys multiple times, if they can get these guys, through the order multiple times, you can get them out of the game earlier. I think that seems to be what teams care about more is like the times through the lineup penalty. So if they could get Schmidt to face, Gunnar Henderson twice through the fourth inning or I'm sorry, twice through like the third inning, and they're coming up to face him the third time in like the fifth inning, you might get Schmidt out of there a little early, get to the bullpen, and that'll set up the rest of the series, positively for the Orioles. If you can get in the Yankee bullpen early in game one, that could set off a domino effect. But really excited for this series. Definitely the most important series they've played so far. It'll be interesting to see what the Orioles do on the roster, if Craig Kimbrel is hurt or not. That'll be an indicator maybe of where their mind is, and it'll set up sort of what the return of Kyle Bradish and John Means looks like moving forward, which again is huge. So sort of just a weird weekend for the Orioles, right? They lose the games, but they get some positive injury news. And while you want to win games against bad teams like the Athletics, particularly at home, I think in general the O's are still in a really good spot right now. The offense showed some good promise in a couple of the games. So in general, I'm not feeling as terrible coming out of this series as I think I did. Probably mostly because the disasters were limited to a singular player, being Craig Kimbrel, who I think we sort of anticipated coming into the season was going to have moments like this. He's not Felix Bautista. We know this. We knew this. We continue to know it. And hopefully these just get contained to, blips throughout the season rather than it being a prolonged and repeating issue for the Orioles. But that's about all I've got for this episode. Thank you for bearing with it. I know the sound quality on this one is a little bit rough. You've probably heard a toddler running around in the background periodically. It's a Monday where I had to get a podcast out, so we do what we can. So I appreciate you guys for sticking through it there. Be sure to follow the podcast on your favorite social media site at the Warehouse Pod. We're on Threads and Twitter. Also, go over to YouTube and give us a subscribe over there. It's free. If we can get to 300, that'd be great. I think we're at like 270 something right now. It's been a lot of fun over there putting up videos. Check us out there. Give us a subscribe, a like, and give us a comment on, what you thought of this weekend series against Oakland. Were you disappointed? Did it happen in the way it happened? Did you want a little bit more? Would love to know your thoughts on the series, and also your predictions for this Yankee series as well would be welcome. And also subscribe to the podcast on your preferred podcasting platform. We're on Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a rating. 5 stars would be great. Helps us get in front of other Orioles fans, which is what we're trying to do here. And you can also go over to Believe.com. That's BLEAV.com, and look at all your favorite podcasts. There's a podcast there for pretty much every interest you've got, whether it be sports or something else. Go over to Believe.com and check it out there. But that is all I've got. Until next time, I've been Tyler, and this has been the Warehouse Podcast. Thank you for listening.